The Alleyman Podcast, Episode 4, Who Owns a Myth?
Welcome to Modern Mythologies. I am Dr. Okoye, religious studies professor and cultural anthropologist, and author of Untold Streets, which is now in its second edition with Silvered Street Books. On this podcast, we explore modern folklore in the urban environment. And as of a few weeks ago, we became the go-to destination for the Alleyman myth. Today, I have with me Seven Dane Asmund, the artist, publisher, and creator of the Alleyman's Tarot Kickstarter project. Seven is a queer writer and artist who makes games and writes poetry, novels, and more. Welcome, Seven.
Oh, thank you for having me, Dr. Okoye.
Of course. So, for my listeners, we've been delving into this Alleyman myth for a month now. This is the fourth week at least, and the more you look into it, the deeper it goes. It all seemed to really begin with the Sour Flowers Instagram video, but there have been a few large touchstone stories for this myth now, and I understand you have quite a big one to tell yourself.
Yeah, that is the case. I am such a fan of your show. I've been following along when I can, but especially late with this Alleyman stuff.
So tell us about what this project of yours is.
Right. So I had my own Alleyman experience about a year ago now. Or really about a year and a half ago. It wasn't quite the same as the ones you've been sharing, and it was certainly not as exciting. But I got one of the other tricks, right? Not a tarot reading. I had just a single penny, and for that penny, he just kind of did a little jig.
A jig? He danced for you?
Yeah, he danced. He was an older guy, white, long beard. He did a little jig, and then he laughed, and he turned around and left.
He did a little dance, and then he left.
Correct. And that was when I saw that he'd left some things behind on the cardboard box he'd overturned. Let me restart. It was another one of those, like, I'm walking past the alley, and I look in, and I see him, and he's, like, waving me over, and I go into the alley, and then he's like, I'll do a trick for some change. I reach in my pocket, I have a penny, which is weird, because I never have any change. He does this little jig, and then he just leaves.
And he left behind something.
Yeah. He left behind this book and his stack of cards. They were all different. The cards, they were like a super mismatched chaos deck of tarot cards.
He left behind a notebook and his tarot deck, the one in the Sour Flowers video.
Oh, I don't know if it's like the exact same one, but a lot of the cards were the same. I compared with the video.
And you are a publisher who has published tarot decks previously.
Yeah, I think it was really fortuitous, right? I think maybe the penny was really a licensing fee for his deck.
A licensing fee? Like you were paying his wages as an artist?
Yeah, I guess. So, I looked in the book, and it was like his guide for how to read with his cards, how he reads them, his handwritten meanings to all of his cards and stuff.
And so the Kickstarter, this crowdfunding campaign.
Right. So I spent the last year figuring out, where all the cards in the deck are from, reaching out to the original artists, asking them to license their cards for the deck. I got okays on almost all of them, replaced a few, and I'm releasing the Alleyman's deck and his guidebook on the Kickstarter, so people can purchase the deck from the Sour Flowers video, right? Almost the deck.
What did you do for cards that you couldn't find the artist for, or that the artist wouldn't let you print their card in this duplicate of the Alleyman's deck?
Yeah. I found some replacements. I made some.
You made some?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an artist too. And actually, a card that I'd made for another deck was in there already.
When you found it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I found it. I've since added a few more of mine, or from the other deck that I've published.
The normal tarot, that's the other one you've published.
Yeah, and just a few for my other designs and stuff.
Now you are blowing past all your funding goals here. It is quite successful. Congratulations.
Yeah, I mean, we're on track to be the most funded tarot Kickstarter ever by the time we finish.
I have to ask. Do you think that this is what the Alleyman wanted you to do with his deck?
What, to share it to the masses?
No. I mean, to capitalize on it. To reproduce it and make money on it. To not keep an artifact for your own uses, but to turn it into a commodity. And at a perfect time, as this hype around the myth is building. It certainly worked out well for your crowdfunding campaign, didn't it? Timing-wise, I mean.
I read tarot, you know. I'm actually pricing the deck at an affordable rate, so my earning margins aren't actually that high. But, yeah, I mean, I guess it's a good time for the project. I mean, your podcast is definitely raising the hype around it.
And who designed the Alleyman's tarot logo?
Oh, I did.
Do you think that it cheapens the experience of this mythology to turn it into branding? I went over some of your social media presence and saw the first posts that you shared, the logo, as you test branding for the Alleyman project.
Well, I actually am really into studying mythology and modern folklore too. And I don't know that I'd call it cheapening the experience any more than you charging for the second edition of your book Untold Streets, which turns urban myth into a saleable product. Yeah.
One of my listeners in the Reddit posited that you might be more to the Alleyman than you're letting on. Maybe a manager, even.
Oh, funny. No, nothing as commercial as that. I had my own meeting, it just wasn't as wild as the rest of your stories.
Except for him leaving you his entire deck and guide.
Sure. I saw that user. It was Revolution Front again, right? On the Reddit. They also said that maybe I'm pushing the mythology along.
Talk to me about tarot booster packs.
Okay, well, the project was doing really well, and I had a lot of artists asking if they could take part.
But this was the Alleyman's real deck. How could unrelated artists take part?
Well, it's the Alleyman's real deck, but it's like you said in the other episode. Mythology is taken part in as a group fiction, right? So if these artists wanted to add their own cards to the deck, I made booster packs as optional buy-in items where, there were standalone cards from 15 or so other artists or decks that people could get to augment their decks or replace cards or something.
And I read on your project that the guidebook would cover these newly added cards and those cards that you were adding of your own designs.
Right.
But the guidebook was the Alleyman's own thoughts and writings on his deck. How did you add cards that went in his deck to the guide?
Well, you have to make some concessions, right? So I wrote some card entries in his voice for those cards, like emulating to the best of my ability what he said on the other cards, to make it still feel complete and whole.
So you made up things and wrote it in his handwriting for some pages. Do these have disclaimers that they are your own thoughts?
Well, no. Because they're like in his voice.
What do you say to criticisms that allege you looked through the Sour Flowers video and just recreated it? That you never met the Alleyman or have his deck?
Is that your criticism?
No, but I have heard it from some of my listeners, so I want to ask.
You seem to have a lot of criticisms, which is fair. Well, I don't know, I'd say maybe, right? Myth is formless, like water. It fills whatever container it goes into, like stories. No matter what I say, the story I'm sharing will fit the container people want to put it in. I don't think I can prove that it happened, and, for people who don't want to believe, they never will. for those that do, they'll pledge to my Kickstarter.
And push you over the $1 million mark.
Yeah, we've got to get that podcast stretch goal.
So you do.
Maybe you can share some tips on how to run a good podcast.
Maybe. You've read his book, and soon everyone will be able to. You've even written in his book as him. What insights to the Alleyman myth do you have to share with us?
Oh, I think I have a lot to share on that. I think that the Alleyman is more than a person. I think he's like an idea, a movement. I think he's in many places across the world, sharing hard, kind truths with anyone who will listen. You can really see it in the guidebook. I just cannot wait to share it. He has some real wisdom in there about life, tarot reading, and it's really cool stuff.
In the guidebook, which people can purchase on your Kickstarter, I've also seen some backlash surrounding the deck itself as being non-traditional. That is an element I'm actually very interested in.
Yeah, people can be traditionalists. I'm queer, I'm trans.
Transgender.
Correct. I'm not a stranger to people being skeptical about how I buck tradition, But people do seem actually upset about this deck. Like the very idea of the deck, it existing as something with 5 suits instead of 4 and a second major arcana. Some people are just tearing it apart on social media, angry that I'm making something that ruins their tradition. But I can't even take credit for that. The deck is largely as I found it.
So you have the original deck in your possession, correct?
Yeah, I do. It's crazy. It's like a collector's edition item,
Will you be sharing the original deck in a video or in pictures?
Yeah, definitely. I would love to do that. But some of the artists I've reached out to don't want me to share their cards and videos of it,
No?
No, they just don't want their card associated with the Alleyman thing. So I can only show the cards that I'm already printing in the deck. And I've already pretty much shared all those. They're in the images on the Kickstarter. It's the ones that were used.
I see. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think I've taken enough of your time. You're very busy with your big project. Thanks for joining us, Seven.
Of course. Thank you, Dr. Okoye.
That was the interview I recorded yesterday with Seven Dane Asmund. Well, it was most of it. I showed it to Fred after it was done. Fred Pennyland, and he told me I was being a bit too harsh on Seven. I'm going to be honest. I do not believe for a second that this person met the Alleyman, and that the Alleyman did a little dance and left them a fancy tarot deck to print and publish and make $1 million off of. The campaign has broken $1 million now, by the way. And I am not a fool. I've published books before. I know that Seven is not personally making that money. It goes into production and printing and licensing. But it sounds like a product. They admit to having made the Alleyman branding and adjusting the book, but then they sell it as the real deal, the actual deck, guidebook, written by the Alleyman. It just doesn't sit well with me at all. As an academic, as a researcher, I do my best to keep myself out of my study. I watch things as objectively as I can. When I write a collection of urban myths, I posit my own ideas here and there after I share the material. But I ultimately try to keep the stories to what was said by my sources. I try to keep it to what connections I can draw from the material. I do not sensationalize it for excitement or adjust it to fit in booster packs like it's a trading card game. There is an authenticity to maintain, to myth, to performance for that matter. It would be different if it was upfront, but regardless, it is quickly becoming a small storm of its own. The deck is being well received and supported, so congratulations to Seven. As a capitalist recreation of an artifact, it is in good company with plaster duplicates of old stone carvings. Maybe this is just my mistake for taking urban myths so seriously. So, let's return to our own findings, our own stories, the comments and questions I've received. Firstly, I have seen an uptick in emails claiming to be from the Alleyman himself. And just after the deck thing, it feels in bad taste. I'm ignoring those for now. Thank you. And I want to give my thoughts on the story that Fred shared at the end of last week. You know, collaboration as the card the librarian received. I think she wanted to make a connection to us. But really, it was her. It was her, right? Her collaboration with her community to make a collaborative space to live. It was a thank you and recognition to her work done in her community. I hope she knows that and cherishes the good work she's doing and the lives she's touching. I'd ask everyone who is jumping so far into this Alleyman myth to please help a local mutual aid network. Donate some food or clothes to a homeless shelter, or your time. Pay back for how many stories I've received that have had some poorly chosen language for referring to people who happen to be homeless. I've got another story to share here, or two maybe. We'll see when I finish recording this one. We'll see what fits here. But next episode, if we're still on the Alleyman, I want to do something else. I don't want to just become a stage to read your Alleyman stories. There's something deeper and more interesting here that I, as a researcher, want to pass. But for now, I'll stay your narrator. Let's see. Yes. Yes, by email, I've received a couple tales of interest I'd like to share. There's one I'm quite fond of. It came with images, so I would like to start there. I will ask if I can share those on the Reddit post for today. A listener, Prolix Footle, offered this. They are the one who shared the Alleyman nursery rhyme, and they have since found it in a text that was mentioned in their great-grandfather's journal. It's like an illuminated page. Though I should start at the beginning, the great-grandfather's story. It truly is a fascinating tale, written in his own hand. He goes into town to get the month's supply when he sees a man in a side street. Let me read some of this word for word. Then I headed towards the mercantile. This is where I spied a gentleman standing in the dim light of a hitherto unnoticed side street. He had empty fruit crates arranged around him as stands or tables and seemed to be vending some sort of amusement or perhaps some type of service, as a placard, illegible at a distance, was placed in front of the crates. This is where the oddities began. As he neared, he began to notice that the man was in rundown clothing, but describes his clothes as a frock coat and a well-worn bowler hat. Then, as he approached, the man drew out in a flourish his strange deck of cards and offered to tell his fortune. He notes that the ambient sounds begin to disappear, but more strangely, that the shadows draw darker and nearer, dimming the alley, though it was midday. I love this part. As he nears, the Alleyman says, I glimpse good Sirrah into's heart which was, which is, and what may yet be, for I am a soothsayer extraordinaire, and will rightly tell ye all that the spirits allow me to see. To which he wrote, I suppressed poorly, I fear, a chuckle. So we all experience scam artists in the same way across time, it seems. I'm surprised to see that the reading still cost 17 cents and that he was willing to pay it. The journal was from 1874, and my roughest searching has told me it could well be like offering someone $27 today. A rather high price for 1874. Still, he pays. Then the Alleyman chants something strange for his shuffling. Spirits old, spirits new, show my clear, show me true. Let the cards speak to me, that I might know his destiny. More on that after. But he deals out his cards, which are included in the pictures, presumably kept all this time. First is the wall, then the unpierced veil, which is a blank card, and the final card that was some old branding pasted onto a card. The Alleyman explains that there is a barrier that the spirits will not trespass or share their knowledge from, and that there is a difficult road ahead. He then gifted a book to the man as well, the book being one that Prolix Footle shares in the email. The complete handbook of folklore, mysticism, arcana, and legerdemain in the Seven Known Universi. A lovely and interesting looking tome. The nursery rhyme is Alleyman, Alleyman, don't be late. Bring your cards to read my fate. Alleyman, Alleyman, in an alley's shade. Well met, Alleyman, ply your trade. Alleyman, Alleyman, take your fee. 17 pennies and all for thee. Alleyman, Alleyman, make your spread. Heed my query, my lot to be read. Alleyman, Alleyman, ye see true. Now I know what I must do. Alleyman, Alleyman, get ye gone. Cards have spoken, the read is done. A note in pen on the page says, can't be summoned, but maybe enticed? Where to begin? I think this story, most importantly, shares something strangely unique to the myth I have noticed. It is not abnormal for different people's tellings of a myth to come from different places, have different themes or different feels to the telling. But in this case, especially the myth's target, the Alleyman, seems to be different in each place he is found. His theatrics are so well placed for where he was found. I start to wonder if perhaps it really is some mantle, more than a man, that exists to be interpreted by those who wear it. At any rate, I believe I am running out of time for today. Still, I want to talk about another email I received. This one from someone simply marked as an old guy with a dog. This listener lives near a park in a mid-sized urban city, and he walks his dog through that park frequently. There are two men important to this story. One he calls Shouter, and one he calls Carlos. Shouter is a troubled man who is often in the park and who is often yelling at no one in particular, though he will yell at you if you get too close. Carlos is an older man who walks with a walker and who will talk to you, but only about strange things such as whether he should buy pork and beans from the local market. Our old guy with his dog is quite fond of Carlos and talks to him each time he sees him, even if Carlos doesn't seem to recall who he is. Now, the writer notes that Carlos seems to have some trauma that affected him physically and mentally, perhaps an accident of some kind, so his memory is not so good. Then, the strange tale. One chilly morning, he was walking his dog when he saw Carlos and Shouter sitting at one of the concrete picnic tables in the park, across from one another. Our writer feels protective of Carlos and moved to intervene, but then he saw the two of them speaking to one another, patiently, calmly, and quietly. He could see that there were cards on the table and that they were illustrated and larger than playing cards, likely oracle or tarot. It was as if Carlos were giving the Shouter a reading, as Shouter stood up and left the table while smiling, and Carlos gathered the cards up as our writer approached. Now, Carlos looked at our writer as if considering something, then flipped an odd large coin and shook his head when it landed, packing his things up and standing up from the table. Our writer notes that when he talked to Carlos next, Carlos was back to his slightly off self. Then the weather went bad and the pandemic began, and he hasn't seen Carlos since. But he writes explicitly that it was as if someone or something had temporarily moved into his body. Neither of the two men seemed the same in that moment, and that is something I have to agree seems true to the myth, and what I'm starting to think it might be truly about. A moving spirit of some kind. I suppose the question for today becomes, are any of these stories real? By bringing up this topic, by bringing it to light and asking for people's thoughts, have I tainted the myth itself? Are there enough old stories that are already out there prior to my episodes or the Sour Flowers video for me to piece together the origins of the myth? To learn the truth of where it stood before I and others like me, like Seven, meddled with it. But then, did I not myself say that mythology, ancient and modern, grow and form by people taking part in it? Was not the vampire mythology cemented in new light by Stoker's novel, when in fact a number of its facets were untrue to the original myth it was reshaping? And now people think of vampires in that light. Who has the right to shape mythology? I wonder if academics and literarians of whatever kinds existed when Dracula was published had control of whether it succeeded or failed as a book. Is it even my place to pretend at being an authority? Oh, I've gone on too long after all. Next week, on Thursday's episode of Urban Folklore, I am joining Fred Pennyland for his episode covering this topic, the Alleyman. And then I suppose I will be decompressing my thoughts from that on next Friday's episode of Modern Mythology. So, as always, thank you for listening.
The Alleyman Podcast is a podcast produced, written, and directed by Seven Dane Asmund of Publishing Goblin LLC and licensed on a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike International License. The Alleyman character was created by Seven Dane Asmund and is based on the character created by them for the Alleyman's Tarot.
I'm John Dingo, and I produced the intro and bed music.
Outro music produced by Seven Dane Asmund.
I'm Uduak Inyang, and I play Dr. Ala Okoye.
And I'm Seven, and I played Seven this episode. The podcast Modern Mythologies is a fake podcast produced for the purposes of the show, as are its host and characters, and those hosts and characters of Urban Folklore. Any relation to people, real or imaginary, is a coincidence. The Urban Folklore Reddit and Dr. Okoye's email, profokoye@modernmyth.live, are real and available for you to use to reach out to the character, and I will read comments and emails each week for the next episode. The two stories shared at the end of today's episode were, in fact, from people who sent in emails. Please like, review, and share episodes wherever you find them, and consider donating to support this and future projects at the Publishing Goblin Patreon, or follow us on all social media, all of which can be found at publishinggoblin.com. Thanks for listening.